Welcome and thanks a lot for coming along. So before I get going and introduce our guest, just a little bit of admin. Obviously, we've got Aidan's going to do a presentation for however long he wants to do a presentation for, and then we're going to move on and do questions from the floor, basically. So if you want to ask a question, the way to do it is on the right hand side. You can see the you can see the box there that's got a question mark in a bubble. If you click on that, you can ask a question, and then we've got access to all those, and we will get through as many as we can. We aim to finish by 11 o'clock. Okay, and when we finish, as you come out of the system, there'll be a very short questionnaire if you could fill it out, and I promise you it is short because I know you've got other things to do later on today. But first of all, to introduce our guest today, who is Councillor Aidan van der Veer. So Aidan is currently the Deputy Leader of South Cambridgeshire District Council, and he also holds the transport portfolio, which is arguably one of the most difficult in the council. If you know that the transport issues in and around Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire are very live. He's also a very experienced politician. He's been a councillor since 2013, and he's also been an election organiser. He stood for Parliament, and he worked for, I believe, Lucy Netzinger when she was the MEP for the area as well. And he is now obviously the Lib Dem candidate for Mayor of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. And most people are saying that he's got a very, very good chance of success. So it's a real privilege for us to have Aidan to speak to us today. And I know you've all got views about and questions about where Cambridgeshire will go. But before we move to that, I'll hand over to Aidan.
Thank you very much, Martin. Yeah, it's very, very good to be here and to be able to talk to you a little while about what I think we can do with this with Cambridgeshire over the next 4 years and beyond, because Cambridgeshire is just a really interesting place to be working in at the moment. Certainly as a politician, I mean mainly positively, but there are some negative sides to it as well. I mean we are in a sort of geographically really interesting place with the Oxford-Cambridge arc going in one direction, innovation corridor going in the other direction, and the sort of developing corridor up to Norwich as well, and they come together here, and so we have a sort of essentially really quite an important, interesting national role in the economy. I mean, we are able to produce things that are not currently being held up quite so badly by the new post-Brexit customs regimes. Thankfully, not producing lobsters or anything like that. So our challenge is to try and maintain that contribution to the national economy, maintain some economic growth, and manage successfully the changes that come with that. In particular, the housing that's needed. We've got this sort of strategy of new settlements and large extensions to Cambridge that are in many ways very hard to deliver, but do bring huge benefits when they're done successfully. And then alongside that, there's all the infrastructure that's needed to make them work, and transport. So one particularly knotty issue. So I mean, in terms of being the sort of mayor of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, I think I think we can really make Cambridge and Peterborough much greener and fairer, and that's the sort of the sort of core themes of what my campaign is, as well as being a strong voice for the area. I mean, I have a positive vision about what I will do as mayor, which I'll set out in a little bit more detail. But it is worth saying at the outset that my sort of pitch to the electorate does have a strongly political element, in the sense that, to put it bluntly, James Palmer, the current mayor, has largely failed, and that failure is really a necessary part of what I have to say. This this particular election, isn't just a matter of sort of two sets of competing ideas about what each of us want to do, but it's also about the quality of governance and the quality of leadership the Cambridgeshire needs, and that really is at stake in this election. Yeah, so I'll start off saying a little bit about what a sort of a greener and fairer Cambridgeshire looks like. Cambridgeshire has some good sort of starting points for I mean, becoming a greener place. We've got some sort of starts of a really interesting public transport, but what we need to do, one of the core things of making contributing to reducing impact of climate change, for example, is having a really good quality core public transport offer. And that needs to be, again, a little bit of a contrast with what James Palmer's doing. Needs to be something that's really high quality and attractive, but also something that we can deliver quickly, and have some confidence that will happen soon. And so that's much about looking at something that's realistic, that can be constructed in parts rather than in one big go in 10+ years' time. And it's also about sort of the approach to it. I mean, working together with everyone involved to get that vision. So without sort of needing to necessarily sort of pin down all the details of what a really high quality public transport system could look like, those principles, I think we need to agree very quickly and get on with that, so that then we can start getting it built and start making sort of decisions confident in the knowledge that we've got a plan to put that in place, and then building on that. We really need to tackle sort of public transport more generally, and that means how the wider bus network fits in with that core high quality public transport in Cambridge, and that means getting on with some urgency with reforming the structure of the bus market, probably some form of franchising, but doesn't have to necessarily be, but it does need some further financial support. And that in turn requires some sources of funding. So that's a thing we've got to tackle. Again, I think it's not something that we can just resolve in an election. It needs some proper engagement. We've had some problems. Up until 6 months ago, I was on GCP, and we didn't really get as far forward as engaging with people on what financing better quality public transport meant. But that's got to be a really urgent priority, is talking to people about that, and that will mean some form of charging. And underlying that, I think we're really lacking a comprehensive strategy on what we call, in the jargon, active travel, but for normal people, cycling and walking, so that we can see where we need to get to in terms of a network of cycle routes, and some good quality standards on that, and on pedestrians, so that the huge numbers of barriers that are preventing actually our already high level of obviously cycling can get even can play an even bigger role. That potential is just really palpable. On the environment more generally, we've got some good stuff starting off on climate change and biodiversity. Some of the councils are doing some interesting things, and the Combined Authority itself, with the Climate Change Commission, for example, there isn't. We do need a step change in the political momentum on this, so that we are really pushing making the climate change and considerations around nature sort of fundamental to all of the other decisions that we're making. I mean, transport, for instance, that there are still just too many road schemes and car-based developments that haven't really grappled with the problem, thought about how they can contribute to reducing carbon emissions. I mean, inevitably, with the sort of growth that we're talking about, we will need more roads, but they've got to be much better planned in. And the housing, more generally, I mean, obviously through the planning process, planning system, we're sort of pushing as far as possible with the environmental standards for new houses. The real problem is on older houses, and given the role that the combined authority has in housing, I think there's huge potential to have a much better have a retrofitting rollout that does really tackle that, that brings all the players together, both the councils in the private sector on this, and as well as central government, so that we can start seeing some real change on that. I mean, sort of pulling that all together a bit, for the most part, people here are active, as I understand, in property and development in Cambridge and surroundings, and therefore have a sort of ongoing stake in the success of the place as a whole, and that isn't obviously just about economics or monetary wealth, but there's that interplay between the well-being of residents, the quality of the place, and our economic success is vital to bear in mind. And the particular sort of characteristics of what makes Cambridgeshire special and successful, we need to sort of focus on, and in particular, for example, there's that relationship between the built areas and areas of nature, and people don't want to come here just for a good job. There are some really good jobs, but that's not. I'm talking employers. That's clear. That's not the only reason why employers want to be here and why they think they can attract the sort of skills they need. But it's a whole package as well as the jobs. There's sort of lifestyle, mobility options, access to nature, and the human scale of the place. All of this together is what makes it attractive. And as we're planning all of these things, the interventions on the environment and transport and development more generally, that all of that needs to really be preserved and enhanced. And one example that I know well, because I'm on South Cambridgeshire Council, is Camborne, which has in many ways captured a lot of that. I mean, the sort of that easy access to nature, for example, is one really successful thing, but it's not yet fully part of Cambridge, and we can learn from it and overcome some of those hurdles. And it really, especially as we move on to the next stage of the development of Cambridge and well beyond that, with new local plans, with East West Rail, and with sort of the Oxfam arc as a whole. On the sort of making Cambridgeshire fairer, there's some, I think again, the housing, the opportunities to really change the housing market, especially at the affordable end with the combined authority, really needs grasping. We just haven't had that impact yet that we could have with the leveraging the funding that we've got. That's one important thing. The other is on skills and business and business support generally. That the combined authority has some really interesting powers on, and that are particularly important to get right now with where we are with the COVID pandemic. The getting young people into really good skills training and better jobs has been an absolute priority. I mean, in general, the inequalities of our society have been made much worse by the pandemic, but young people have been particularly hard, with their education disrupted and job prospects curtailed so much, coming on top of obviously Brexit and climate change, which is a real blight for many young people. So as Mayor, would invest in career support throughout school life. At the moment, that career support is really patchy and inadequate. It needs to be so much better. One of the things, for example, we can get successful people from businesses and university into schools more to have those conversations and interactions about that shape children's sort of career goals and horizons throughout their sort of school life, so that then they sort of can see their own potential by the time they get to sort of making those choices about training and education later on. The other thing I particularly want to develop is apprenticeships, which I've done a bit of work on that in the GCP. It's interesting how the thing that's really holds back apprenticeships, use of apprenticeships or take up of apprenticeships, it isn't so much the funding, because obviously with the apprenticeship levy there is funding, nor the sort of appreciation that support for developing new skilled employees is what it can bring to a firm. But it's the complexities of it, and the finding the right people, and sort of getting through that funding quagmire. And the Combined Authority can put together the support that's needed to really hugely increase the numbers of apprenticeships. For example, by having some sort of brokerage style service that can bring people, match up employers and employees, and help them through the whole process, so that, especially so that smaller businesses can access that. I mean, yeah, it's coming back to this issue of leadership of the Combined Authority and the failure there. This is a sort of problem on a range of levels. One of it is around confidence in the decision making of the Combined Authority. I mean, I don't have anything against golf. I don't play it because of inability than lack of desire. But if you have 5 minutes, do have a look at James Palmer's Facebook page, and in the video of a visit that he made to the Pidley Country Club and Golf Course recently, and where we have collectively as taxpayers given £32,000 to this golf course, and I just don't see the justification for spending money that is for sort of helping businesses through the pandemic, so that a golf course can put new sprinklers on the greens and the roof on a clubhouse. At a much bigger level, there's how the CAM program has been managed. I mean, we're now pretty much four years into this, and we are about to decide on what the scheme's actually going to look like, and start on doing the business case pretty much from scratch. And with I mean, a scheme of this scale needs resources, but it's the control and the transparency around the resources that are being put into this is a real problem. And there's a range of associated things. I mean, on a sort of planning and development issue, garden villages constantly crop up in relation to CAM and the Combined Authority, and I'd be very interested in anyone's perceptions here about what they think garden villages are and how they're going to fit in. But I am currently involved in the Combined Authority and in planning matters, and I would struggle to say really define what they are and what the plan is for them. And this isn't just a matter of some wasted money, or even just a matter of delays. I mean, there was a really serious problem of managing the Combined Authority like this. Delays things and risks the ability to deliver projects such as a good public transport system for Cambridge, which we're not going to know whether it's going to happen or not for years and years yet. But it also dents public belief in politicians and local authorities to actually serve their people and stand up for them. Developers, for example, people in the property industry are dealing with bullshit locals all the time. I realise that, but sort of together, I mean, collectively, our shared underlying confidence in our public institutions is really essential for both the well-being of our residents and for economic prosperity and business strength. And I think that's really where the foot is here. Yeah, I'm really interested to discuss any aspects of what I've said or other opportunities that there actually are with the combined authority and their position as mayor. So we've got to
unmute myself. Yeah, I've just unmuted myself. Thank you very much for that. And I think it's really helpful, and I think it sets the scene in an interesting way. I'm going to start with basics, and we've got questions coming in. And just to remind everybody, please submit questions, because the idea is to put your questions to Aidan. I'm going to just start with local authority reorganisation and whether you think it's needed, and if so, what sort of how do you think it should look?
Yes, I mean, there is a particular problem in Cambridgeshire with things not just functioning very well. It always feels like it's sort of personalities and politics is what's getting in the way, and we all ought to be able to get along a bit better. But I do think that if we did change some of the structures, that it might make getting along better and focusing on what really matters much easier. I mean, you do get a sense sometimes that the different areas of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough don't always sort of see that their interests are necessarily aligned, and to some extent that they aren't. So, for example, you had some unitary authorities that are larger than the current sort of district and city councils. You might get a better functioning system. Sounds like that's been dropped for now from the sort of priorities of the government. But I'm really interested to look at it again. I think we, one way or another, we do need to make things run more smoothly in Cambridgeshire.
I would agree with that. I'm a big advocate, by the way, of local government reorganisation. I think it's really needed. And just talking about that, I know a lot of the focus of the mayoralship has been on and there's a perception that a lot of it is around and built around sort of Cambridge. What are your plans for Huntingdonshire and for Peterborough?
Yes. Yeah, the combined authority and the mayor has to absolutely not be just thinking about Cambridge. It's so there's I think the particularly acute problem is more about sort of geographic inequality, the way in which some of the areas of the north of the county are not feeling the economic benefits of the economic growth of the last few decades in Cambridge, and so the skills development, the economic interventions that the combined authority can do through the business board need to be focused on finding what areas can be developed particularly in the north of the county. In Peterborough, there's with the university, there's a sort of a start of something very interesting. I think hasn't yet found its focus, its sort of niche, and what it's particularly going to add, other than doing some sort of interesting sort of business focused courses, and for example, some more thinking needs to be put in between about how the teaching links up with the research that's been going to be there, so that then it does become a institution with a specialism and a particular attraction, so that it can really add to the vitality of the city more broadly. With Huntingdonshire, there's also some educational issues, for example, around in St Neots, the lack of further education in St Neots, in a town that's going to be not far off Cambridge by the time we've finished with it, needs dealing with quickly, so that then there are real opportunities there, and people don't have to move away at that very early age. The road network's very good, some particular pinch points, but the sort of public transport interventions we've been talking mainly about Cambridge, I think need to be thought of as well for Huntingdon, St Neots and Peterborough, so that again there's a really good attractive alternatives to the car there.
Okay, thanks. I've got a question in here that I think just a bit of clarification. I think you mentioned that the plans for garden villages are unclear. What would be your plans, and how would you change things?
So one of the funny things about the garden villages is how they it's how they didn't really fit in with the growth strategies that are already being developed. So you can't be having two growth strategies in the same place. We've got in the Greater Cambridge area the sort of the existing new towns, and what we've been finding is that new settlements need to be of a certain scale to really work. And one of the concerns about garden villages was that they wouldn't become wouldn't be able to become sustainable places in their own right. So the focus has to be on creating those places that are as far as possible able to attract the range of businesses and employment opportunities, that they don't become just community settlements, which is, I think, one of the difficulties with something the size of Camborne. So the infrastructure that is put in needs to be there to serve that growth strategy more. That's the starting point, really, and obviously both whether it's the local plans or not wider non-statutory spatial strategies, either combined authority or the new one that's coming for the ARC, needs to be the starting point for that, rather than garden villages that serve to pay for or justify some transport infrastructure. That's the sort of the concern there, not the fact of new settlements or where they are.
Yeah, so just as an example, some of the conversations we have about garden villages, there is a thing about them being able to consume their own smoke, so that what we're not doing is using them just to create a commuter town. Is that the sort of thing you mean? So you've got the infrastructure, including the economy on site.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, and just link to that, because I know a lot of the new towns, and it's impossible to talk about a garden village project and not talk about the CAM, certainly on the ones I'm working on. So there's a question here about if you're elected, what are your intentions regarding the CAM project, and in particular the one CAM delivery vehicle?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest question is the one CAM delivery vehicle. I mean, although it is costing us a fortune, there are some really good people involved in that. I mean, I've been involved a little bit in the setting of it, and in order to do ambitious schemes of this nature, you need really good experienced people. So there's a team there. I think the real problem is more about the conception of what the public transport is that we need. CAM at the moment, CAM's a bit of a vague term, and because it has been changing so much in the last year or so. But it is the fundamental problem with the conception is that it is nothing is actually going to happen and contribute to improving the transport situation and therefore congestion in Cambridge for a good 10 years, and we need to have an approach that solves the problem sooner and is realistic and less risky. I think so. It's not that we don't need some form of I mean, to tunnels, for example, they're a solution for a particular problem. I wouldn't be surprised if there are no other solutions to that problem, but that feels like one should be having that as a starting point. Whereas at the moment, I fear that we're not going to end up with anything that improves things for a long time, and because of the scale and the complexity of the project, there are also these sort of risks that to it. I mean, we're never going to get sort of 100% confidence in the funding for it at this early stage. We're going to have to do a lot of the work on this in the way that we're going on CAM, sort of really just in the hope that that it works out, and we just can't. I don't think sort of the greater Cambridge economy, people of Greater Cambridge, just can't take that risk.
Yeah, I mean, there may be other ways of delivering that risk, because and you know, this is an interesting question about, you know, would you like sort of more innovative ways of being able to raise money and to raise funding for things like the CAM, because you know, the current model, partly, and this is me talking about throwing my own politics in here, which I've been trying to avoid today, but it's part of the issue is that we're so reliant on the traditional funding methods for infrastructure, and it's part of the answer, getting the freedom to be able to do things a bit differently.
Yeah, it'd be really good if we could explore these other funding models that do, in particular, that do provide funding through the growth that we get from that investment. That's what we're sort of lacking in a sense, and clearly, I'm coming back to the election itself. James has been exploring that. My understanding is we haven't really got very far with it, whether that's because there's just so much institutional reluctance to do that at the sort of national level, or whether because we just haven't come up with a convincing enough case.
Yeah, okay, that's really helpful. And it's one of the questions that our clients ask of us, and one of the discussions we have quite a lot with our clients, and it to a certain extent fits in with local authority reorganisation. But do you think there should be, it's a number of different ways of looking at it, but a single local plan for the combined authority area, or less local plans and more combined ones?
Yes. So at the scale we've got local plans at the moment, people do feel like they are sort of able to engage with them and relevant to them. I mean, we've got to sort of keep that as a sort of first principle. They've got to be responsive to local people. They've got to have the sort of confidence of local people. And the one I'm involved in, which is Greater Cambridge, which is a large area, even at that scale, there's going to be difficulties. I'm quite optimistic about that. And if you get to a sort of combined authority level of local plan, then I think it just feels too distant to have that democratic legitimacy. The problem we're trying to solve, though, is how things are well coordinated, how we sort of decide on sort of allocations across borders and on infrastructure schemes that require larger areas to justify. I mean, one we're talking about now, for example, in a lot at the moment is the water supply. I mean, we need to really crack that one if we're going to go beyond a certain sort of limits of development, and also about issue about public confidence as well, and that no single authority is going to be able to deal with that. It's probably a little bit beyond the scale of the combined authority, but that would need sort of to look well beyond your boundaries, and there aren't yet the institutions. I mean, effectively for that example, we just have to go and appeal to central government and lobby central government on that, and it's not really a setup that gives confidence that we can solve our problems ourselves. And the combined authority obviously should be having a role in that. I mean, does to some extent. I think that can build more in its role in coordinating between authorities. I don't want to always come back to it, but that does depend a lot on good quality of cooperation and trust between all the authorities. Could do a little bit better on that, I think. Whether that ends up as being a statutory spatial plan or a non-statutory one, I think as long as that sort of core, as long as the sort of power to make decisions about your own place is not taken away from the sort of lower levels, then I think the more robust, larger scale regional plans, there's a lot to be said for having something stronger there.
So you've talked about the issue of devolution and regional government is very live, and you've talked a little bit about this, about the fact that you would like, about the role of government. What sort of powers do you think government should be devolve into combined authorities?
Well, ideally, any powers any powers that really don't need a wider involvement. I mean, that's healthcare and things like that. You already got the structures of healthcare at that sort of regional scale, and they really ought to be better. And putting in place the sort of shared structures and shared governance means that they would end up being better integrated and better able to serve the residents. So integrating the healthcare and social care rather than having to set up whole new structures to deal with that. But there are lots of funding. I mean, we are still having some confidence in funding to the combined authority, for example, for different sorts of investment, for education, for example, has helped give some stability to, you can sort of think further ahead. But we're still very reliant on bidding in to government for different things. Whereas what devolution should really be about is giving that autonomy and eventually some forms of fund tax raising powers that are again not constantly negotiated on a ad hoc basis. I mean, healthcare, the sort of confidence in funding for transport investment. Certainly, there's plenty more potential there.
That's helpful, thank you. And sorry, another question here about housing associations and affordable housing. So, as a developing housing association, we're beginning to see resistance from local council members to all affordable housing developments, especially 50 to 100 units in size, even though these developments offer a range of tenures, including affordable home ownership. What's your view?
I'd be interested to know sort of what a little bit more what the reasons for that resistance are, because the sort of small, much smaller affordable housing developments have their place, and I can see that they're much easier to integrate with places and more acceptable to people, but you're never going to get the huge contributions to the overall numbers to that. And I certainly believe that yeah, large scale affordable housing developments, yeah, of that sort of size, I mean, should absolutely be supported. I suppose it's a sort of, I'm sure be some sort of localized issues, and we can see how we can overcome them. I mean, yeah, depending on the size of the community, having an affordable housing development of that sort of size can feel like quite a daunting thing. Like you're going to get lots of sort of people coming in from outside, and they'll be hard to integrate with people. One of the largest ones in South Cambridgeshire in recent years was in my village. That was put over 30 units in Barrington, and that has gone extremely well. And I think it would have gone as well if it was more like 50. I mean, there's plenty of demand, and without there needing to be too many, a sort of a sense that it's just providing affordable housing for outsiders. Perhaps it's something to do with the presentation engagement whether the sort of the council or combined authority, if you're involved, could actually try and address that to reassure people.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say from a personal perspective, from what we see within Curtin&Co, I think you know, with the consultation we do, and I'm talking about sort of beyond Cambridgeshire, we get two different, very, very different and contrasting attitudes to affordable housing. We either get, we don't want any of them because it means we're going to get oiks in our village, or we get people, and this is the right approach in my view, absolutely demanding of affordable housing, and very, very vocal about the need to make sure that affordable housing is delivered according to policy. Yeah.
Maybe it's just, yeah, the quality of the housing that you're talking about. If obviously communities have confidence that you're going to deliver good quality housing that's well designed, that contributes to the place, I'm sure it helps as well. I mean, I don't know sort of the attitudes across the whole every bit of Cambridgeshire, but I think probably overall Cambridgeshire is largely positive to the contribution that affordable housing can make to communities and the general housing market.
I think Cambridgeshire is probably better than a lot of the other places we go, to be fair, and I would agree with that. Do you you've talked about the university. What sort of skills do you think will come out of the university? What sort of stuff do you think it should offer early? University, yeah.
So, I mean, the broad domains of the sort of engineering, sort of high quality engineering skills, and a range of issues there, range of areas there important. I think Peterborough has some sort of good base of industries on environmental services, for example. I think that could be developed into a real specialism of the university there that other places, certainly in the region, of that nature of sort of specialist vocational type skills could be developed out, and so some of the things will be finding the particular niches within those. I mean, they're quite broad areas, but the sort of having some other seeing how other the sort of universities that are not the sort of top academic ones have succeeded is by finding particular specialisms. So there's some definitely some work there, and yeah, so the research projects, that there's the first phase that's already been announced, but there's some others in the pipeline that will be interesting. I'm just going to make sure that that the research does sort of there's synergies with the teaching are absolutely prioritized, so that you're attracting the students who really want to specialize in those things that you're doing the research on. I mean, that's the sort of fear of the percentage. The way it's being sort of presented at the moment is on the teaching side is you'll sort of get some sort of general skills that will help you get jobs in Peterborough, and I think it's got to be more ambitious, that both in terms of sort of people who are attracted, but also what you can do with the skills you learn in Peterborough. Now, even if that means people will move away, the overall the university will benefit, and the city itself will benefit by sort of adding to the life to the city in so many ways.
Do you think there should be some connection between what the university delivers in Peterborough and potentially the Cambridge economy? Because the thing that interests me increasingly at the moment is we've got elements of our county are pretty disconnected, and I'll talk about, and Wisbech, I think in particular, that's its biggest issue. But at the same time, we've got the Agritech corridor running up to Norwich. We've got the Oxford-Cambridge corridor, and I just wonder if there's the potential, if you've got the university right as part of it, to deliver a corridor that runs basically, and to focus on a corridor that runs from Cambridge up to Peterborough.
Yeah, indeed, and there was some interesting sort of bits that Huntingdon could contribute to that as well. I think historically it has been very hard to get the sort of the Cambridge economy to go very much further than 5 miles away from the city, and I think we've got to not fool ourselves that we can click our fingers and make that change. I mean, it is very good, obviously, that Anglia Ruskin's involved in getting the Peterborough University going, and that's something that we can exploit. And at this stage, I think looking out for those links and those ways in which Peterborough and Cambridge can complement each other, I think it's probably, without getting sort of over ambitious, is what we should be looking for, because Cambridge obviously can't do anything. It's got its own limited specialisms. I mean, that are really good at, but and they are very different to Peterborough. So they've done well with some complementarity there.
Yeah, just you touched on something during your speech, which the speech, it wasn't. During your words about the Greater Cambridge Partnership. It's something that's a little bit dear to my heart, but I just wondered what your view is about the future of the GCP. Should it still exist as the entity it is? Because I know this is one of the frustrations, I'll be honest in saying this, that people have had with James is he's focused a lot on these sort of structures, and as an example, the issues with the GCP. And I just wondered what your views about the future of those structures, and the GCP is an example of it, but and where we go.
Yeah, indeed, and GCP in a sense shouldn't really need to exist, because now that you've got the command authority, you don't need. It's just a sort of another level. I mean, it is really just a delivery vehicle for a certain amount of money to do a certain job that it was given to given to it, that was given to it 6 years ago, because sort of the combined authority didn't exist at that time, it became it took on some sort of functions around that sort of got involved in thinking strategically about the development of transport around Greater Cambridge, that are not, I mean, that the councils involved sort of decided that it would do. The combined authority is now the local transport authority. It's up to that, to the combined authority, to determine the strategy. And if DCP is able to deliver that well, then that's fine. I think, yeah, I mean, you've sort of started saying it. I think there's a confidence issue from the point of view of some of the other sort of people involved in GCP, we need to have confidence that that the sort of the authority above that's going to that has got those sort of rightly got those powers are going to use them in a way that we can all work with, and I think that's the real problem. Is that so much of the work of the combined authority has not been as consensual and collaborative as it really needs to be to bring everyone along with it. So it unfortunately turned into a bit of a sort of institutional battle, which was in itself really quite counterproductive. But it's that's a symptom of another problem. I mean, the mayor as a position has some powers themselves, but the role is largely to get people working together better, rather than actually taking powers away from other people. The GCP has got its another 9 years of life. I think we should, if we can't sort of agree on something, some better future for it, then we should make sure it does its job, and by then hopefully we'll have done some reorganisation in the way we were just talking about.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is that, you know, there's a lot of funding tied up in the GCP, and the thing we mustn't do is risk that funding. Is that, you know, the big, well, and use it to a good purpose, of course. I just going to work towards wrapping up over the next few minutes, because I said we'd stay until 11. One of the things that there is live at the moment, and I think this is relevant to pretty much everybody that's sitting and watching this today, there is a live debate going on at the moment, is the way I would put it, about housing numbers in South Cambridgeshire and whether South Cambridgeshire is over delivering in terms of housing. And I just wondered what your views were and how we resolve that issue, because actually that debate is an interesting one, because it happens absolutely everywhere where there's contradictions, between the requirements of local plans, a lack of understanding sometimes about the impact of economies on house prices, as an example, when you under deliver. And I just wondered where you sat on that, and you know, what's the way we resolve that issue? Is it just through the local plan?
Yes, the affordability of housing is a good way into it. I've seen some debates recently on social media about this question of the comparison between Oxford and Cambridge, that Cambridge has been delivering a bit better over sort of the last 15-20 years, better than Oxford, and you can actually see that in the affordability of housing, and the ability of people to either to afford to live near where they work is really fundamental for me, in a sort of in what I want to do, both in terms of the sort of well-being of people and also the environmental impact of that as well. I mean, we're starting to talk about this in relation to the Greater Cambridge Local Plan. The biggest impact on climate change that we have is through transport. So if we can get people travelling less, that means living closer to their house, to their work, then we will be able to sort of make our contribution towards getting towards zero carbon emissions. And that does mean, and if the jobs are continue to be sort of concentrated in clusters around Cambridge, then that does mean more housing here. There are a range of constraints on the numbers of houses that we can build. That's the water thing has come up as quite an important one. The other sort of bit of work that we've been doing is on just the rates of house building, and there's been some really interesting discussions on that. The Letwin review is really good, although that seems to have sort of become less talked about, but we're still bearing some of those recommendations in mind, and that's not. There's a range of constraints there that we need to be thinking about, both in what we can do ourselves as local authorities in our policies, but also in possibly in getting government support to unlocking that. So it's not so much about the sort of overall housing numbers and where you put the housing, but how quickly you can get those houses built. Of course, we have overall in Greater Cambridge now a large number of very big sites at various stages that do total many tens of thousands of houses. I'm well aware of that. I think there are certainly ambitions to go well beyond that, and the Spear report does envisage growth well beyond that, and I think we've got to, although it's worth just thinking about things, I think we've got to get right the things we're doing, both in terms of the quality of the places we're building, but also the getting them built sort of quickly enough, and also sorting out the infrastructure. I think if we have and in broad terms, James is right on this. If we have better quality infrastructure, we'll be able to build better and more sustainable houses. Quite frankly, the sort of school of thought that's being expressed at the moment by some people that we should just be doing the absolute minimum, I think isn't. We will be, if we do that, we will be failing to address the problems that we've got here in particular. It's not just about a matter of national house building targets, it's problems that we've got here, in particular around affordability and quality of life, that do mean that we need houses, and as much as possible houses that people can afford to live in.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And the point you make about Oxford and Cambridge, I think, is a very valid one. You know, as a company, we do sites and we do deliver around Oxford as well. And I have to say, Cambridgeshire is a much better place. I'm biased because I live here, but it's a much better place to work in. I have to say. I'm going to finish with a final question. With regard to the election in May, and it's not just a flippant question. It's really important to some of our client clients, because you know, often we will try and avoid having live planning applications during election periods. So knowing when an election is really important. So do you think the election will happen in May, and do you think it should?
I'm almost certain it will happen in May. All the signals are that it will happen in May, and our reading of the politics of it is that it's very much in the interests of the government for it to happen in May. They're doing a lot of preparation on how to make the the process of voting reasonably safe. The real problem is actually campaigning for an election. I mean, an election isn't just about the voting; it's about all the campaigning, the talking to people, and that you can't just do that with sort of one leaflet through a door a week before the election. That is not an election campaign. So I think it should be moved back, not because of you can't do the voting safely, but because it won't be a really open and fair election. I think it's doing damage to the sort of democratic process by having it with these constraints at the moment. But I'm sure it will happen though.
Okay. I just want to say, I think I said we'd finish at 11 and we are just after 11. So just want to finish. Thank you very much for your time. Really important, really a privilege to have you here, and really appreciate the fact that you've taken your time out for us. And I hope what it's done is given people an oversight of what Aidan stands for, and you know what his campaign to be mayor is all about. I think it's going to be quite a lively campaign actually, and I'm sure people are going to find ways of being heard. Just a quick plug: we've got an similar event with James in a week or so's time. So anybody that's watching today, please feel free to join that as well. But just finally, as just a reminder, as you leave, there'll be a very quick survey to fill out. But just once again, I'm going to finish just by saying thank you very much, Aidan. I really do appreciate your time, and really do appreciate listening to your views as well. Thank you.
Thank you.